Yesterday, the Washington Post reported that two men who survived an initial strike by the US military off the coast of Trinidad were left clinging to the smouldering wreckage of their boat. They were then targeted with a second strike just to kill them. The boat had 11 people on board. The order was very specific: kill everyone, leave no survivors. That order, according to two people directly involved in the operation, came directly from Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of, well, this wasn't an act of defence, and neither's the US at war with the people in these boats. Todd Huntley, the former military lawyer in counter-terrorism, told the Post that killing any of the men in the boats amounted to murder. So let's go with Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Murder, for now, in the spirit of calling a spade a spade. This attack didn't happen in just the last few days. It was the very first attack that we heard about, and the very first attack we saw video footage for back on September the 2nd. But we only just learned that Hegseth's order had been that explicit: to kill people, to leave no survivors. And similarly, we only just learned that that meant there was a second strike specifically to take out two presumably barely alive wretches who were clinging to bits of wood. We didn't know about that because the video footage we were shown did not include the part where the smoke cleared and the survivors could be seen. The footage did not include the second strike, specifically and solely to kill those people, on the orders of a former Fox News host. Weird how that footage was incomplete in that way. Since they were so proud of themselves, you'd think they'd want it all out there. So, how much difference does it make? Well, it simply gives the lie to the paper-thin justifications even more. The Trump administration has declared that the people in those boats are a thing they describe as narco-terrorists. Still calling a spade? That is just a made-up thing. You could accuse them of being drug runners, maybe smugglers, whatever. The sort of criminal activity people have been intercepted and arrested for engaging in the recent past. But Trump slapping on the word terrorist at the end makes it sound slightly more reasonable to use lethal force against them. There's a meme that goes around on MAGA and right-wing social media where they're still a bit sore about being accused of being a bit fascisty and all. And he goes something like this: they don't want to kill you because you're a Nazi. They call you a Nazi so they can get to kill you. I suppose it's as good a slogan as any to rationalise to people why other people might be making starkly unflattering comparisons about them. But if you took that post and changed the words to replace you-know-what instead with the phrase narco-terrorist, you have an exact description of what is currently going on. So yes, the administration declared itself to be in a non-international armed conflict with designated terrorist organisations, designated of course by the Trump administration, the same people who designated that Canada's Doug Ford doing a video with Ronald Reagan in it constituted an emergency for the United States, and hence able to be responded to by Trump using dubious emergency tariff powers. What else will those crazy kids get around to designating as something or another in due course? Maybe those Democrats who made a video pointing out that military members are supposed to refuse illegal orders, like maybe blowing up boats or something. Trump already called for the death penalty for them, albeit in the manner of random nonsense coming out of his mouth that is rarely taken seriously, but who knows? Most international onlookers have seen this action by the United States against the boats as non-judicial killings. Sure, in an actual armed conflict, the state ends up often as the judge, jury and executioner, but that's exactly why you're supposed to get Congress involved in the declaration of war. But, details. It turns out that the Secretary of Murder was not best pleased with the fact that news about this lethal strike had come out in that old-fashioned process we call journalism. He posted on social media this: As usual, the fake news is delivering more fabricated, inflammatory and derogatory reporting to discredit our incredible warriors fighting to protect the homeland. Now, I didn't see anything that was criticising the soldiers on the ground, but of course it serves to deflect the criticism by pretending so. And then we get the usual blarney. These highly effective strikes are specifically intended to be lethal kinetic strikes. Kinetic being a posh-sounding euphemism for blowing shit up. The declared intent is to stop lethal drugs, destroy narco boats, and kill the narco-terrorists who are poisoning the American people. Every trafficker we kill is affiliated with a designated terrorist organisation. We have noted before that drug trafficking is a crime in the United States, yes, but not one that carries the death penalty. So while you can call them terrorists if you feel you have to, and assuming you're right that it is actually drug runners in those boats because we've had no evidence of that, then we might agree they're not fine, upstanding people, but summary execution is also not the action of fine, upstanding people, arguably. Hegseth then declared this: "Our current operations in the Caribbean are lawful under both US and international law, with all actions in compliance with the law of armed conflict and approved by the best military and civilian lawyers up and down the chain of command." I expect he meant to say the best lawyers that are left after, we fired all the ones who didn't say what we wanted them to. Knowing what quality legal advice looks like, let's face it, isn't a universally acknowledged strength of this administration. And it would certainly be a first if they actually knew or remotely appeared to care about what international law does or doesn't say. In closed-doors briefings with members of Congress, attendees had complained at the lack of any detailed briefing whatsoever, certainly not any specific evidence as to the identities of the people killed. Specifically, of course, going out of your way to target civilian survivors of a strike. A group of former military attorneys who released a statement yesterday said that targeting those survivors is wrong, whatever the situation. They said this: "Not only does international law prohibit targeting these survivors, but it also requires the attacking force to protect, rescue, and, if applicable, treat them as prisoners of war. Violations of these obligations are war crimes, murder, or both. There are no other options." So yes, we've said all that here before, but one important thing has now changed. Because up until now, these actions caused a ruffle of anxiety in Congress, maybe a few pointed questions, often muttered, but by and large the Republican lawmakers had been cowed into acquiescence, even for this. But that is starting to change. As Trump has had a growing number of losses on all of these things he was flooding the zone with, and Republicans did so badly in the recent small number of elections that were held, so we are now into the phase of Trump's presidency where his status has passed from domineering authoritarian power to lame duck. As we've seen elsewhere, that means more people are beginning to find some remnants of a spine again. Republican-led committees in the Senate and the House have said they will ramp up their scrutiny of the Pentagon's actions against these boats as a result of this Washington Post report. It seems that just waving away factual reporting and calling it fake news is no longer enough. Senator Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Senator Jack Reed, the committee's top Democrat, issued a joint statement saying that the committee is aware of recent reports, i.e. the Washington Post ones, and the Department of Murder's initial response. Now, they're still using the old name of the department, of course, just for protocol's sake, I expect. The committee has directed inquiries to the department, and we will be conducting vigorous oversight to determine the facts, they said. And then in the House, the leaders of the House Armed Services Committee, Mike Rogers and Adam Smith, followed their lead. Meanwhile, Trump is pressing ahead with new initiatives to show to Americans just how much of a zero-tolerance guy he is about that whole drug trafficking thing. So, for instance, he declared that the world should consider the airspace over and around Venezuela to be closed, because that's the sort of thing countries do to other countries these days, apparently. And why? for reasons of an unexplained link to drug cartels, see? But then he also announced he was granting a full presidential pardon to Juan Orlando, the former president of Honduras, who had been convicted of drug trafficking. Some grand, subtle 4D chess moves going on here that us mere mortals couldn't hope to comprehend. Or maybe just for natural internal contradictions when what you're doing is not what you say you're doing. We can make our own judgment about that, but more importantly, there are now lawmakers with a growing appetite to discover the truth for themselves. In due course, maybe this will be one of those moments that when people look back on it, everyone will be swearing that of course they weren't in favour of what was being done, and of course they were heroically resisting it. Will the cracks appearing here dissuade Trump and his team from pursuing additional actions against Venezuela with a view to regime change, which they seem to have been contemplating? Obviously, we're going to find out in the coming days. Closing the airspace doesn't seem like a good sign. But they are still likely, it seems to me, to restrict themselves to limited, targeted strikes they can carry out with minimal risk to anyone other, of course, than the civilians, the narco-terrorists who get caught in the crosshairs. Whatever it is they actually do, let's hope that the rumblings we're hearing this week is a sign that there will be some degree of holding to account.